Good afternoon from Hanover, Pennsylvania. Memorial Cavalry statue behind me. It is a brisk 19 degrees Fahrenheit this morning, well this afternoon now, which is about -7 Celsius, I believe, so it is quite chilly out here. I've been over to Vinny's Deli and picked myself up a coffee. If you're ever in Hanover, Pennsylvania, doing a history tour or just passing through, several restaurants down here I recommend. There's the Beer House behind me here. That's a good German restaurant. It's closed Mondays and Tuesdays, so we can't do that today. Then there's also Vinny's Italian Deli across the other side of the square, and serves really good coffee, also really good Italian pastries. It's gonna come out of the way of the traffic a little bit. As you can see, Hanover is an important location in the Gettysburg campaign because, like Gettysburg, it's the intersection of many roads. The battle took place here on June the 30th, 1863. There's a very angry truck driver over there. The battle took place here on June the 30th, 1863. It was what we call a meeting engagement. So it's not a planned battle. This was where Confederate and Union forces essentially bumped into each other. And then that turned into, at first, a skirmish and then a full-on battle. It was a meeting engagement between two forces. Why did it take place here at this busy intersection in downtown Hanover? Because it is, as then as now, an intersection of many roads that pass through this area. 116, the York Road, going from York across to Hanover. Also got the Carlisle Road going north towards Carlisle, so Carlisle Barracks, big cavalry barracks up there at the time, now the site of the US Army War College. So very important road junction, and as armies are moving around searching for each other, the function of cavalry, remember, is not just offensive, but it is also a reconnaissance function at that operational level. You send out cavalry to look for your enemy's forces, and so that's what the cavalry are doing on both sides. Union cavalry and Confederate cavalry are probing and searching for each other in that period leading up to the Battle of Gettysburg, and so the encounter takes place here. So we're talking about June the 30th, 1863. The two forces that are going to be engaged here are going to be Confederate cavalry under Jeb Stewart, and are going to be the 3rd Division of the Cavalry Corps of the Army of the Potomac under Judson Kilpatrick. So reasonably evenly matched forces during the battle and throughout the battle during that day. How did they get to be here? So we'll do a quick run through. When Lee's Army of Northern Virginia began its move north up the Shenandoah Valley to cross into Maryland and then cross into the Cumberland Valley into Pennsylvania, the responsibility that Lee gave to Jeb Stewart's Confederate cavalry was threefold. One was that he would cover the right flank of Ewell's corps. So as Richard Ewell's infantry were moving up into Pennsylvania, the cavalry would screen his right flank. Also, as a function, the cavalry were to capture as many supplies as they could. Wars are all about logistics. So to capture additional horses as remounts, to capture food supplies, very important, particularly to capture fodder, grain and fodder for the vast numbers of horses that were moving as well. So that was a function of the cavalry. And then the third function of the cavalry was in a raiding function. And if they found anything that, if destroyed, would hinder the Union Army of the Potomac, they were to destroy it. For example, when they moved into Westminster, Maryland, and wrecked the rail depot and wrecked miles of track either side of the rail depot in an effort to hinder the Union supplies and hinder the movement of Union troops north into Pennsylvania. So that was a function So it's part of the threefold function that was assigned to Jeb Stewart as an independent command. So there's a lot talked about that Jeb Stewart went off on this wild ride all by himself, all on his own ideas, and there was no plan to it. He was just riding around trying to get his name in the newspapers. Well, I mean, he was a flamboyant commander. That's true. He liked to dress flamboyantly, and, you know, he did like to see his name in the newspapers, but he had a mission and he was fulfilling that mission. So, for example, on the front of capturing supplies, he captured a wagon train at Rockville, Maryland, that had a lot of good fodder on it, which was going to be useful for making his cavalry more mobile. You didn't have to just kind of like live off the land, try and graze on grassland as you were going. You actually had fodder and could keep your cavalry moving. There was also additional supplies in that would be valuable to the Army of Northern Virginia if you could get that supply train up to there. So as he's moving, he comes into, as I said, Westminster, Maryland. A small skirmish in Westminster, Maryland, with some troops defending there, tried to smash the railhead there, and then believing that Richard Ewell's Infantry Corps, so that's 2nd Corps of the Army of Northern Virginia, believing that Infantry Corps is in York, Pennsylvania, he heads across country towards York, Pennsylvania, and that's going to lead him towards this road junction here at Hanover. So then we come to the Union force, which is a cavalry division under Judson Kilpatrick. Now, Judson Kilpatrick is one of the boy generals. There's actually 3 boy generals in this division. So there's him leading the division, Custer, George Armstrong Custer, newly appointed as Brigadier General, and Elon Farnsworth, newly appointed as Brigadier General. So 3 very young generals. You know, we're talking about people that graduated from West Point in the class of 1861. So these are young men in their 20s, their early to mid-20s, that are already at the rank of Brigadier General, in command of brigades, and in Kilpatrick's sense, in command of a division. Custer is an interesting case in point. Custer was actually appointed Brigadier General and took command of a brigade comprising 4 regiments of Michigan cavalry only on the 29th of June. So only the day before this battle, Custer had been appointed to his brigade command. So the men in the Michigan brigade had no idea who he was. Luckily for them, perhaps, Custer dressed very, very flamboyantly. He was wearing a red velvet jacket, a brown felt hat, olive green pants, a big red scarf. I mean, it was said he stood out like a circus rider gone mad. So he was easily identifiable to his men. It was like, well, that's your general, that guy there, dressed flamboyantly. So, but he'd only taken command of the brigade 1 day before. Farnsworth's division is moving also towards a concentration point with the Army of the Potomac. So if you can think of the divisions of the cavalry divisions and the cavalry corps of the Army of the Potomac, we know that John Buford is moving on the right. He will come into Gettysburg the day before, so he'll come into Gettysburg. Kilpatrick's division is moving in the middle of the cavalry, and then of course we have Gregg's division moving to the south. So there's 3 cavalry prongs marching across Pennsylvania, seeking out the Confederate cavalry and also seeking for the Confederate infantry. So Stewart is moving towards York. Farnsworth is also moving towards York. Farnsworth arrives in this area first. His cavalry column, Kilpatrick. Farnsworth is one of the brigade commanders in Kilpatrick's division. So Kilpatrick's division is moving effectively along what is this Carlisle Road here behind me, and moving into town. It's strung out through the streets, farmland to the south of town, strung out through the streets. About 5 miles in length is the column of the individual cavalry regiments, strung out in a line. The baggage train of the cavalry division strung out in a line. So at the rear of Kilpatrick's column is the 18th Pennsylvania, guarding the wagon train and bringing up the rear. and they are the first unit to encounter Confederate cavalry. Confederate cavalry essentially just run right into the back of them. It wasn't a planned engagement by the Confederates, it was not a planned engagement by the Union. They just bumped into each other and fighting began. Now this is a two-phase battle here at Hanover. So we have fighting that begins at the rear of Judson Kilpatrick's column. Begins at the rear with the baggage train, the 18th Pennsylvania. Kilpatrick is already through the other side of town. Farnsworth, one of his brigade commanders, is through the other side of town with him, and most of Farnsworth's brigade is through the other side of town. Though the 5th New York are down here, the 5th New York are actually passing through the town centre at the time. You can get a refill of coffee. So it's a very confused situation. Both Kilpatrick and Farnsworth hear the sound of gunfire. Kilpatrick turns his horse, and as the division commander, he rides hell for leather back in towards town. His cavalry escort, his personal cavalry escort, trying to keep up with him. Some of them actually have to ride so hard to keep up with him that they completely wind their horses and they wreck their horses. Their horses are so winded that they're unable to participate in the action that is to follow. So also then Farnsworth turns around the rest of his brigade and they start coming back into town. Now the engagement literally takes place in the streets. The first phase of the engagement takes place in the streets here in Hanover, through this square. It's one of the rare occasions in which there is street fighting. So we see street fighting at, for example, the Battle of Fredericksburg in 1862. There's some fighting through the town. So there are occasions in which battles take place in town centres, but it's very rare for a cavalry engagement to take place in an urban setting. And if a cavalry engagement did take place in a more urban setting, usually what would happen would be that the cavalry would dismount, fight on foot as skirmishers. But they do not fight on foot as skirmishers here. This is actually a cavalry action in which men draw pistols and men draw sabres, and we charge, well, they charge, not me, they charge backwards and forwards through these intersections in these streets, fighting hand-to-hand cavalry action. Primary action down here in this area is with the 5th New York. The residents of the town naturally take cover. I mean, if there was a fight that just started right outside your house right now, you'd probably head down to the basement or up to the attic or to a back room to get away from the gunfire and get away from the mayhem that's going on outside your house. And that's exactly what the residents of Hanover, Pennsylvania did. Most of them took cover. So the fighting took place here. It was very confused fighting. As there are lots of back alleyways and side streets through here. If you're fighting in this kind of confused situation, this confused street fighting, it's no different than if you're on horse and if you're on foot and you're trying to move around. These units cannot hold unit cohesion, so you can't maintain an entire regiment together. So you have small groups of cavalrymen charging each other. You have other small groups that are trying to make their way through a back street or through a side street to come around behind people. There's a lot of ambushing taking place, where if a man gets separated from his unit, 3 or 4 people will try and surround him and like gun him down. There's a lot of ambushing going on. Very confused, very bitter, a lot of hand-to-hand fighting here. So men falling from their horses, killed and wounded in the street, horses killed and wounded in the street, making horrific noise, riderless horses galloping backwards and forwards. It's a very confused situation. Now the fighting just tends to peter out here. There's no gain to be had by Stuart from continuing a fight in downtown Hanover itself. And so Stuart begins to disengage and reorganize his forces outside of town. He holds high ground outside of town, so he's able to get artillery up onto that high ground, and he's able to get some of his men up onto that high ground in a good defensive position, but it's also a position in which artillery can be fired now down onto the Union forces. So that really ends the first phase of the Battle of Hanover. I mean, It might be the most exciting phase of the Battle of Hanover because you literally have cavalry charges up and down this street, something that not many people have experienced that far in the war, and not many people will experience again. I was trying to think earlier today about how many instances there have been during the Civil War in which cavalry actions took place, mounted cavalry actions took place in a street with cavalry charges. So obviously Hanover, which is where we are today. The other one I could think of was in Lee's retreat from Gettysburg. There's the cavalry action at Hagerstown, Maryland, which is also very similar, fighting in the streets there. But trying to think of other cavalry engagements that took place, mounted cavalry engagements that took place in a urban setting, and I'm struggling to think of one. I mean, if we discount John Wayne in the Horse Soldiers and what's clearly a converted Western set with this stage piece battle in there, but like in historical terms, I'm trying to think of whether I can think of more than these two, and I don't think off the top of my head that I can. So, a very unusual battle, and the first phase of the battle. That now brings us to the second phase of the battle, and this is where Custer comes in. So Custer's brigade is coming in to reinforce the rest of the division. Stewart now holds the high ground outside of town and has some artillery up there. Well, this is a good day for Custer. Custer is no fool. We can question later. I mean, last year we took a battlefield tour and shot some video at Little Bighorn, and we talked a little about there during those battlefield tours. We talked a little about how Custer overcommitted and made some tactical blunders at Little Bighorn, which led to destruction of a third of his command. But here at Hanover, Custer acts superbly. Remember, he's only been in command of this brigade for one day, so this is his first time in command of a brigade. He's never commanded a brigade before. He's been jumped essentially from captain straight to brigadier general. He's never commanded a brigade before, and this is his first opportunity of command with 4 Michigan cavalry regiments. So Custer's facing a force that has the high ground and has artillery. Now, to charge up a hill on horseback into the face of artillery and the face of musketry would have been suicidal. And so what Custer does is he has some of his command trucks. Some of Custer's command are armed with Spencer 7-shot repeating carbines. Not all of them, but he has, I believe, it's the 6th Michigan, and several companies of the 5th Michigan are armed with 7-shot repeating carbines. So they can put out quite a sustained level of carbine fire, rifle fire, if you will. What Custer does is he dismounts those men. So obviously some people have to remain back and hold the horses, you know, but it's now become a classic, what we call dragoon action. So by the book, Custer dismounts his men forward as skirmishers, and they move forward using fence rails and stone walls as cover, and try to advance upon this high ground and get into a fight on the ground, a dismounted fight on the ground, trying to take that high ground. Now they give that a couple of goes. It's unsuccessful really because Stewart has cannon up there, and Farnsworth is not able really, Kilpatrick is not really able to bring artillery into play, Union artillery into play in this battle. So Custer's assault on Stewart on the high ground is a brave attempt, and you know, he doesn't give up very easily. I mean, he tries a couple of times to get that high ground and to capture those cannon. But ultimately in this second phase of the battle, which is dismounted action. Remember, the first phase is mounted, cavalry charges. Second phase is more of a classic dragoon action. Very much like Buford will fight the next day on July the 1st at Gettysburg, dismounted troops as skirmishers fighting on the ground, whereas Buford's fighting a defensive action and falling back ridgeline by ridgeline. Here on the 30th, Custer's fighting an offensive action, advancing that skirmish line forward and trying to take the enemy position. So that's the second phase of the battle. Now the second phase of the battle comes to an end inconclusively, and like so many battles in the Civil War, it comes to an end simply because it gets dark. And you know, we are in an age in 1863 before night vision goggles. We are in an age before thermal gun sights. We're in an age before we have helicopter observation with FLIR, and so we're unable to identify the enemy in the dark. So we're really unable to fight in the dark, and so the battle essentially ends at nightfall. So, as terms of the engagement goes, what happened here was that Kilpatrick's division lost about 20 men killed and but about 180 wounded. Confederate casualties were similar in terms of killed, 60 killed, and perhaps 150, 160, so slightly less wounded and captured. But the effect on this was that it had delayed Stuart for yet one more day. So all the things that had delayed Stuart up until this point, for example, skirmishing at Westminster and spending an entire day at Westminster trying to destroy Union equipment and Union logistics, that had delayed him for a day. Fighting at Fairfax Station had delayed him for a day. Capturing the wagon train at Rockville, Maryland had delayed him for a day. So Stuart has been falling behind where he needs to be. So if he's trying to make a junction with Lee's army, he's falling behind, and this is yet one more day here in which, as a result of fighting an action here all day from about 10 in the morning till nightfall, it has delayed Stuart for another day. As the action ceases, this is where it becomes a point of contention. So you would think that Kilpatrick would try and remain in contact with the enemy and resume offensive action as soon as light comes up, or at least try and maintain contact with them throughout the night. But Kilpatrick withdraws his forces and continues moving off in an opposite direction, looking for Richard Ewell's infantry, and just completely leaves Stuart's cavalry alone. And that breathing space is what will allow Stuart to essentially escape and make his way round by circuitous route. It'll take him another day entirely. It'll take him the whole of July the 1st to move around the Union flank, and eventually he'll move up to Carlisle, Pennsylvania, and looking for Ewell. He won't find Ewell there at Carlisle, Pennsylvania, but he will hear the sound of the guns south at Gettysburg, and then begin that movement south to Gettysburg with the Confederate cavalry, which will of course arrive too late to participate on July the 2nd, but on July the 3rd will fight a very big cavalry action east of the town in what we know as East Cavalry Field. So the Battle of Hanover, is it significant? Yes, it is. It's a battle that is one of those battles that proves that by the summer of 1863 that the Union cavalry were the equal measure of Confederate cavalry. These were forces that were equally matched in training, in motivation, and in armament, and in tactics. So earlier in the war, the Union cavalry had earned itself a reputation as being not as good as the Confederate cavalry, but by the summer of 1863, they were the equal measure of their Confederate enemy. It is also important in the Gettysburg campaign because it delays Stuart for another day. Arguably, it delays him for 2 days because he then has to make a circuitous movement on July the 1st to get around the Union Army. So it prevents Stuart's juncture with Lee for another 48 hours. So it's important on that basis because it will keep Stuart out of the Union rear. if Stuart had been able to just move straight up into the Union rear, if he'd have continued up 116, Pennsylvania 116, right into the rear of the Union forces there at Gettysburg on the evening of July the 1st, or even the morning of July the 2nd, it would have been a very different battle there at Gettysburg, but it's delayed him significantly for him to get there. So it is important in those terms. So why don't we talk about it? Why don't we include it as part of the Gettysburg battle? Well, we don't, because when we talk about the Battle of Gettysburg, we are literally talking about the battle that took place in Gettysburg itself. We're not talking about the Gettysburg campaign. If we're talking about the Gettysburg campaign, then yes, we include Hanover in that, and yes, Hanover is very, very important. So of the men that fought here, we know what will happen to Jeb Stewart. Jeb Stewart will continue as a cavalry commander and will ultimately meet his fate at Yellow Tavern, whereupon one of his brigade commanders, Wade Hampton, will take over command of the Confederate Cavalry Corps. Judson Kilpatrick will take his division to Gettysburg. The division will be split. Custer will engage at East Cavalry Field as part of the action at East Cavalry Field and earn himself a distinction with the Michigan Brigade at East Cavalry Field on July the 3rd, 1863. And Kilpatrick with Farnsworth's brigade will attempt an action on July the 3rd on what we call South Cavalry Field, broken ground. If you are below the round tops at Gettysburg on that side of the battlefield, and you notice how broken and the ground is with stone fences and wooded lots, not ideal country for a cavalry charge. Perfect for you to dismount cavalry and move them as skirmishers, but Kilpatrick makes a bad decision and he orders Elon Farnsworth to lead a cavalry charge through that area, and losing several men, lots of horses, and also Farnsworth loses his life there as well. So Farnsworth fought well here as a brigade commander on June the 30th, and on July the 3rd his life was lost at Gettysburg. So then we know that Custer will go on in history to become a legendary cavalry commander, certainly for his actions on the plains in this post-Civil War period. Kilpatrick, really as a result of this botched cavalry charge at Gettysburg on July the 3rd, will earn the nickname Kill Cavalry within the Army of the Potomac, so he earns a poor reputation. He will then be sent off to become a cavalry commander under General Sherman. Now Sherman knows that Kilpatrick is young and impulsive and will sometimes do maddening things that get men killed, but that's exactly the kind of cavalry commander that Sherman is looking for as Sherman storms his way on his way from Atlanta to Savannah, so that march to the sea, and that's exactly the kind of cavalry commander that Sherman wants. So Kilpatrick, for example, who earns this bad reputation as a result of July the 3rd here at Gettysburg, he goes off to fight with Sherman. They're very similar in many ways to when you look at 11th Corps, those Germans under Oliver Otis Howard, who've earned a poor reputation at Gettysburg for breaking on July the 1st. That's also a corps and a commander, Howard, that gets sent to Sherman and performs exceptionally well under Sherman. So there you go. I mean, you know, just because you fail in one thing, there's no reason for you to give up. You try again somewhere else, and you may actually be successful. So here in downtown Hanover today in 2022 on this very cold afternoon, as you can see, we have a memorial statue behind me. The statue was erected in 1904, so some years after the battle, and it says Battle of Hanover, June 30th, 1863, between Brigadier General Judson Kilpatrick's 3rd Cavalry Division, Army of the Potomac, and Major General JEB Stuart's Cavalry Division, Army of Northern Virginia. So we have the statuary down here. There are some historical markers down here from Civil War trails. Great guys, we'll tag you in this post later. So there's some markers down here for Civil War trails. On the far side of the square are also some cannons, some memorial cannon. So it's a neat little place to visit. There is on-street parking. 10 cents parking in the meter will give you 30 minutes. So it's not an expensive or extortionate place to park. There are some good little restaurants around the square here. So if you're on your way to and from a place, if you're on your way to Gettysburg, you're on your way back from Gettysburg to somewhere else, and you're just looking for a stop-off point, Hanover, and certainly the central square here at Hanover, is a good place to just stop at, come get a selfie by the statue, read the historical markers, check out one of the restaurants. I'm going to go back over to Vinny's Deli later and pick up some salamis and cheeses to take home. And you also get some good cold cut sandwiches in there, or you can check out the German restaurant, which has good beers on tap and German food. Zeichen de Purpose, so sign of the horse from my O-level German, as I recall. So yes, Hanover, Pennsylvania. Important battle, interesting place to visit, very close to Gettysburg. So if you're visiting the Gettysburg area, do come on and check that out. So thanks for joining me today. It's very, very cold out here. As you can see, I'm wrapped up in every item of Carhartt clothing that I own. I drove here today straight from the barn after feeding my horses this morning and came out here. So I'm kind of like nicely dressed for the barn in comfy clothing that when it was 17 degrees this morning, I was breaking ice on their horse troughs. And I was like, I'm not going to go home and change. I'm just nice and warm and comfortable in all this padded Carhartt stuff and my insulated Ariat boots. So just came out here. I look presentable from the top down, but if I kind of like go waist down on jeans and boots, it's kind of like a mixture of paddock mud and what should we call it? Horse things that we may have trodden in this morning. So that's me today, and I need to get back in the car, warm up a little bit, then I'm going to go and get myself another cup of coffee, and I'm going to head back home because those horses need to be fed again this afternoon, as I've been talking about in some of the TikToks this week and some of the Twitter tweets this week about the logistics of keeping cavalry in the field, and you know, how much fodder an individual cavalry horse requires, and then how much fodder is required for a regiment of cavalry and a division of cavalry even. So we were talking about that at some of the tweets and some of the TikToks earlier in the week. So thanks for joining me today. It's cold. I want to get out of the cold. There are some more events coming up. Check those out on the Facebook page, facebook.com/walkingtheground, all one word. You can find me on Twitter. There's a link on the Facebook page to Twitter. There's probably a link on the Facebook page to the TikTok, where there's some TikToks. I will download this video and upload it to YouTube later on. If you like what you're seeing, as I do all these tours for free, there's a link on the Facebook page which will take you to coffee.com, and if you want to buy me a $3 coffee to warm me up, I would love that. I don't earn a living from doing this. I'm just kind of like doing it for fun. So appreciate any coffee donations that you want to give me from the Facebook page, and I'll take you a link over there. Thank you for joining me. Sign up for the next events, and I will see you at the battlefields later on this year.